One of the things I noticed as I was kind of flipping through and scanning your essays, for those of you who did turn them in, was that we seem to be having some difficulty identifying main ideas. And I'm not exactly sure where we went off the track here. I know that in the previous essay we did, we talked about possible main ideas. We did not do that for this one because, for the very simple reason that the idea is that you would write the second essay with more independence, that you would require less support when you wrote this because we've been doing this since the beginning of the year. Now remember, this is the second unit that we're doing on nonfiction research. The first was reading the weather, reading the world. And so a lot of the lessons that we have here about reading, annotating, determining main idea, collecting evidence for details, a lot of that synthesizing across several texts. We've already learned those things. We reviewed them as we were going through the unit, and the expectation was that you would be able to apply them to the unit. However, what I noticed was that many of you are still unable to do that. So I will continue to provide support for you, but I will tell you that our days are dwindling. At some point, you have to be able to do this completely independently without teacher support. I can give you feedback on your essay and show you how to improve it, but you should be able to read, annotate, determine main ideas, plan properly, and execute an essay. Remember, we have been writing essays since the very beginning of the year, and it is now the middle, almost 3/4 of the way through February. So at some point, we have to start working independently, and we can't just grab onto our first thoughts and think that they are our best thoughts, because our first thought is not our best thought. So what I want to do today is I would like for you to go ahead and turn to the next available page in your reader's notebook. And we're doing it in readers because we are working on a reading unit of study. Even though we're writing an essay, we're working on a reading unit of study. Go ahead and put the date up in the corner of your paper. This is our second essay. If you remember, our first essay was about the events leading up to the American Revolution. But we have a totally new text set in which we're reading. We also have a new prompt. And just in case you've forgotten what our prompt was, and pointing out to you that we did this on the 4th of February. That's when we started this. It is now the 26th of February. So we have been working on this essay for quite a few weeks. So stop for a minute and do a self-assessment. Where are you in this process? And why have you not reached the point where you're ready to write? Some of you are still reading. Some of you didn't bother to annotate the text when you read, so when you go to plan, you have to reread everything. Remember our chart for FSA writing. You need to annotate your text, or you're going to waste time. And I will tell you right now, when you waste time in school, whether it's because you were absent, whether it's because you were disengaged, whether it was because you're making up other work, it doesn't matter. It is nearly impossible for you to make up that time. That time is gone forever. And unless you make a huge effort to make up that time on your own with independent study, you'll never get it back. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's think about some main ideas that would address this. Remember, the American colonists faced many challenges in the war against Great Britain. Write an informational essay in which you explain what the problems were and how they were solved. Okay, so who can give me one of the problems? You could choose it right off of your planning sheet. Galila? Okay, George Washington had an untrained army, and what I would say, not specifically for that, I would just modify it just a little bit, and I would say the Continental Army, because even though George Washington was the general, there were other troops involved. So we don't want to narrow it to just to the troops that George Washington was in charge of. So this is a possible main idea. There are others. Who has another one? A and C? Well, that's our prompt. That's our thesis. That's not a main idea. That's a thesis. We're looking for main ideas. So if you said they face many challenges, all you've done is repeated your thesis. Okay? A different main idea. Jaden?
The fight shifts towards the south.
Well, that's the title of one of the articles, but that's not a challenge that the American colonists faced. The fact that the fighting changed to the south was not a challenge for the American colonists. Anybody else? Roman?
But they didn't have enough soldiers in the fight.
Can you say more about that? I'm not sure I'm clear.
That they lost a lot of soldiers.
Okay. All right. So let's just help. Let me just help you a little bit about that. When you are talking about this prompt, we're not talking about anything that actually happened in the war. We're talking about the challenges that they faced on the very first day before they fought their very first battle. So if you have a main idea on your planning sheet that has to do with a specific battle, that's not going to work as a main idea. Those specific battles are more like details than they are main ideas. Danny? Okay, so let's do it. Let's do this way. Since we started off writing our main ideas based on the Continental Army, let's continue that. Okay, so we can say the Continental Army, and this goes along a little bit with what Roman said, was outnumbered. Okay, what about another one? Some of you are done with your essay and it's sitting in the basket, so I'm surprised that I don't see more hands up. Emma? Okay, wait a minute. I need to get closer because I can't hear you. Go ahead. A lot of things were what? Scarce. A lot of things were scarce. Well, I have a problem with that a little bit because remember what I said earlier. Before the war even started, on day one, before there was even a battle, okay, those are the things we're focusing on. What is the challenge? What are they facing before they even start? Galila? Okay, well, the fact that they were being treated unfairly is true, but that wasn't a challenge in the war. That wasn't a challenge in the war. Yes, Kendall?
Britain had taken over Philadelphia.
Again, you're talking about specifics once the war had started. That's not what we're thinking about here. Roman?
That they didn't have enough supplies.
But that didn't happen until they started fighting. Okay, so see, this is a problem. I'm not having a lot of hands up, which kind of makes me worried because that means that you haven't been thinking about this. And I'm getting a lot of details, and you're not listening to what I'm saying or looking at what we have up here to think in terms of a main idea. What other things do you know? What was a challenge? Wow, I'm really surprised. Think about this. We started reading this and learning about this on February 4th. It is the 26th. 3 weeks you have been reading and processing this text set. And that's all I got as a collective out of this classroom. So stop for a second and think. How are you going to be successful if you can't do this with my support? With me right here. With 3 weeks to work on it. When in the matter of 2 weeks, maybe 3, you are going to be taking the FSA and you will have 2 hours to do this work. So if you don't feel a sense of urgency in figuring this out, you should start to feel a sense of urgency at this point. Elizabeth, do you have something? Okay, so stop for a minute, Elizabeth. Did you hear me talk about how we're not focusing on any of the battles? We're not even focusing on anything that happened during the war. We're focusing on what they faced on day 1. Galila? Can you say more about that? I'm not sure I understand it. The British troops were following the Continental Army? I don't understand what that means. Say it again. But that's during the war. You're looking at a specific, the article you're looking at is Raising America's Spirits. Is that what you're looking at? Get that? Okay, I'm not sure that that is really and truly a main idea. The fact that that they followed them. How would you write a whole paragraph about them following them? And how is following them a challenge? Remember I said the challenges they faced were before the war even began. I really love the people that are flipping through their text set, and I'm very puzzled by the people who are just sitting there looking at me like they're waiting for me to find the answer for you. Guys, if you don't grapple with this on your own, if you don't work through this on your own, you're not going to learn. If I give you the answer, you're not going to learn. Aiden, you want to give it a try? Okay, so I'm going to stop you there for a minute. If you were listening a second ago, I believe it was Galila, no, it was Elizabeth that just talked about Valley Forge. And I talked to her about what she said about Valley Forge, and now you're giving me the exact same answer that she gave me because I'm thinking you weren't listening. Emma? Okay, I'm going to come closer so I can hear you. you had annotated the text like I have asked you to, you wouldn't have to be rereading. Nobody has anything. Aliana, do you have anything for us? Okay, what about the people who already turned in their essays? If you're not willing to share what you put down on your essay, then you already are aware that it's not correct, which makes me wonder why you turned in your essay. Emma, you want to give it a try?
Great Britain is dividing America as a
Galila?
the British Army is going to knock the Continental Army out of the war.
Think for a second what you're saying. Why is Great Britain going to knock the Continental Army out of the war? What does Great Britain have? What do the colonists miss? What do the colonists not have? What did you read? And again, makes me wonder, did you read? Did you annotate properly? Were you writing main ideas in the white space? Or were you just underlining everything? Guys, remember, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I'm not going to teach you anything that is going to waste your time. Everything I teach you is going to save you time. Everything I teach you is going to help you to think and figure it out on your own. I'm an expert at this. Anybody? What about the continent? What about the Navy? What about the American colonists' Navy? Anybody notice anything about that? Okay, this is scary. This is very scary because not only was it mentioned, it was probably mentioned at least 3 or 4 times in the text set. Guys, remember, you can't just read without thinking. You can't just read without that lens of what you're searching for. When you read nonfiction, you are searching for information. This is really disappointing. Let's go ahead and turn to the article that says a discouraging start. Let's go ahead and read on the second page of that. The page looks like this. Has this picture on it. So go ahead and read. The very first main idea here is that it's the large army, and you can see that we have the Continental Army was outnumbered. Now, I want you to note you could write this main idea 2 ways. You can write it from the point of view of the Continental Army, or you could write it from the point of view of Great Britain. Just keeping in mind that you want all your main ideas to be written to the same point of view. So go ahead and read through. And when you come across another main idea, that would be a challenge for the American colonists, give me a thumbs up. Aliana?
They had the Britain has the largest armies in the world.
I understand. understand that? I just pointed that out to you. You must not have heard me. I did say the very first sentence is one of our challenges, and it's written right here. In the point of view of the Continental Army, the Continental Army was outnumbered, right? So you could have as a main idea that Great Britain has one of the largest armies in the world, or if you were writing it from the perspective of the American colonists, you would say that the Continental Army was outnumbered. Kendall, did you find one? Okay, here's the problem. We already have it. The Continental Army had an untrained army. They're untrained. Drexy?
Great Britain was a wealthy nation in the world.
Okay. So it says here, Great Britain was one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Okay? So if we're writing this from the perspective of the colonists, we would say the Continental Congress, because they are the one, if you read correctly, they're the ones that allocated money for the war. The Continental Congress had little money. If you were writing this in the perspective of Great Britain, you would say Great Britain was one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Emma, do you have another one? Okay, wait a minute. I need to hear you. Okay, but that's a detail. Olila?
The Continental Army soldiers were not really soldiers. They only stayed there for a
Okay, but what you're saying is what we already have. The Continental Army was an untrained army. What you're saying is just a detail to support that. Who's still reading? Danny? Absolutely, which is why we wrote this first main idea. Don't stop reading. Girexi? Again, what you're giving me is the same as this first one. Lorenzo? Again, what you're giving me is information that goes with the first main idea. Haley? That is a detail that is not a main idea. Sean? Okay, if you were listening, somebody in the back already gave us that information. Who's still reading? You can't read if you're not looking at the text set. Aiden? How is that a challenge? How is that a challenge? See, I think what happens is you read yourself asleep, not on that page, Eliana. It's not on that page, Eliana. Who is still reading the article? Because I'm seeing a lot of you still on that same page. You haven't even got to the next page yet. Tells me you're not doing enough independent reading at home because you're reading too slowly. Danny? Thank you. The British had the greatest navy in the world. If we were going to write this in the perspective of the Continental Army, we would say the colonists had a small navy. Danny, you can roll the dice. Your number is number 16. 7. Okay, so we have 4 main ideas from which you could choose. I would be very careful. These 2 right here are so similar that I would not choose both of them. I would not choose both of these. Choose one of those 2, and then you have the other 2. All 3 of these main ideas had solutions. You're going to have to go find those solutions. Because remember, in your body paragraph, you present the challenge and describe it. Then you present the way that that challenge was met. How was it solved? Problem, solution. And you describe how it was solved. Now, I do want to let you know, I'm going to grade this essay. It is going to count as a grade. So if you turned it in and you didn't have main ideas like this, or if you wrote your main ideas based on Great Britain, which are, that's the way that the other class went. They started writing about Great Britain. Then you need to revise. You need to replan if necessary. You need to rewrite if necessary. You learn a lot when you make a mistake and you have to go back and fix it. That's how we learn. You make a mistake, you have to go back and fix it. So you're going to have to, if you need to replan, you don't need another yellow sheet. If you can use the back, you can get out a piece of notebook paper. Are you rolling your eyes at me? Elizabeth, are you rolling? Oh, I hope not, because that would be very rude. You're going to have to go back to square one if you were off the mark. That's just what we do. We go back, we retrace our steps, and we start over again. So later on today in our workflow, we're going to have the opportunity to work on our essay. And so I would advise those of you who turned it in, unless you have main ideas like this or main ideas like this, I would advise you to revise your work because it will count as a grade. Okay, go ahead and set this material aside because we are going to move on to some other things first, and then we'll have independent time.